Welcome to the Hope Natural Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Erin Ellis, your host. On this show, we discuss all things health, hormones, and happiness with a little side of this thing called life. Daniel Tausan holds a graduate degree in stem cell biology from the University of British Columbia. He spent 4 years into his PhD exploring molecular profiling of exercise before the pandemic pushed him to work with clients and clinics, starting his scientific consultancy, Timeline Sciences, helping bridge the gap between novel biotechnology, individualized data, and human health. He shares the regenerative principles of stem cell biology, complete with nutrition, exercise, and mindset to bring people up to their best selves. Whether they've lost their health and need help dismantling disease, or want to cut through the noise and follow fundamental principles for lifelong health and longevity. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Erin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excited for this conversation today. So let's chat a little bit more about your journey and how you got into stem cell biology and what inspired you to focus on regenerative health. I think it'd also be helpful to explain what stem cell biology is.
Yeah, absolutely. It started off with the desire to be a doctor. You know, the lawyer, doctor, engineer is what the family always pushed you towards. And so I was an athlete. I was an ex-Canadian athlete for water polo, and I gravitated towards sciences. And so about year 3, I got to shadow a bunch of doctors and realized that it's definitely not for me. I asked too many questions. I don't think they wanted me. You know, they're like, "Get out of here! You're going to see 2 clients a day or patients a day. You're not meant for this." And I definitely wasn't. So I gravitated towards sciences, and I found my way in the Biomedical Research Center at UBC. And stem cell biology is just cell biology, except it's a way to get grants, right? So in the 70s, this was already what was being studied, but now when you say stem cell, it's like, okay, well, there's something's happening. There's this big, big event, but it's the understanding how cells can divide. And some cells in our body are really, all they do is they're responsible for making the functional units of our health. And so understanding what those are means that you understand regeneration, you understand cancer, you understand aging. So knowing aging, knowing disease, that was never the goal. It was never the goal to be like, okay, I'm going to help people live long. But I do like being in the know. I like genuinely understanding what is it that makes up the fabric of our existence. And it's when you start digging down, we're about 30 to 70 trillion cells working in complete unison in order to give us consciousness and these higher order functions. And so knowing each cell gives you, call it, a good basis to be able to understand the complexity of the human body. And so I spent a lot of time in the lab, and I didn't necessarily like working with the animal models and call it the heavy duty science. I liked working with people. So I changed the doctorate towards how do we predict health, right? I think you're familiar if you go to a general doctor, not maybe functional medicine, but just your doctor in the clinic, and you say, "Hey doc, I want to get healthier. I'm healthy now, but I want to get healthier." I tell you to get the hell out of his office. Don't waste my time. Come back when there's a problem, and I can help you out. And that's because that's not what the healthcare system is there for. And so, what do we do about that? Well, we can take a look at how do people get. What does health look like on the molecular level? And so exercise physiology has done the heavy duty lifting of the science over the last 50 years, saying what's in the blood when you exercise, what changes in the blood when you exercise. And I used that as a beginning basis in order to build out databases so that when I can compare someone, hey, are you more fit in your blood? Does your blood look more fit? If it does, that usually comes with the benefits. A resilient heart, higher blood volume they can pump per beat. And so this is the way it's beginning to shift towards how do we understand health at the molecular level. And that really gave me the know-how, how to operate and guide people towards what's happening with the physiology? What the cellular level is okay. We're all trying to do our best as to protect it, keep it, have the integrity of the DNA, make sure we still have functional proteome, and that's pretty similar in terms of what our goals are. But now when it comes to physiology, what are we supposed to be doing? How much exercise is the right exercise? Is it just do more exercise?
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely not the case. And so, stem cell biology is interesting because I think there's a really different view of it in the public sphere. People get hung up on embryonic stem cells, the stem cells that people are using for research, but that's very different from what's going on in our day-to-day lives. We have adult stem cells in our body, and if we
Mm-hmm.
go from the head down, really it's we have stem cells in our brain. 15, 20 years ago, you were told, you lose a neuron, you lose a brain cell, it's not coming back. But that's definitely not the case. And at that time, people also, I guess, speculated. They didn't have the heavy duty scientific know-how on how to get to that information, but we've gotten there. We know that within the brain, you have a reserve pool of stem cells in the hippocampus, in the area where you make memories. And there seems to be a few more spots, but at least that one's the easy one to find at
Mm-hmm.
the moment. And if we start moving down, well, all our blood vessels, around our blood vessels, sit the ability for our body to make a scar or start regenerating. And so, that every single little spot in our body has a reserve pool. They're called mesenchymal stem cells. If we go down to the lungs and heart, they're not good at healing. So if
Mm-hmm.
something is going to damage your heart or lungs, you need to be very careful. That'd be a high risk venture or treatment if it has an opportunity to damage that, because there's no reserve pool of stem cells to heal. We go a little bit lower to the liver, one of the best regenerative organs. Though on a technical basis, it's not true regeneration. It's still, from the functional basis, it reconstitutes. More liver comes. We keep going down. Intestines, phenomenal. One of the best regenerative organs. Every 3 to 4 days, you have a new lining. If we keep going down into different ones, bones a phenomenal example. Muscle, excellent. Both very good at healing. So that's what the stem cell is for the adult. And the better you know how to take care of it, the better you know what to do for it, the more mileage you get out of your body. Because maybe it's not necessarily living long, but it's definitely having that quality of life later in life that I think most people want.
Awesome. So you mentioned right there at the end, the more you know how to take care of your stem cells. So how do you take care of your stem cells?
That's I guess the $1 million question. But there's some very simplicity to it. I can start trying to say, oh, you got to take all these right supplements, but the
Mm,
reality is that we can take a look on the planet, and this is what I did, not knowingly when I was a lot younger. I did it more of an interest of just trying to ground myself in what's real, because there's a big difference between science and marketing, and it's taken me a long time to develop the skill to be able to identify science very quickly. So what I did when I was younger, and I've only built off it now, recognizing the value it is, but if someone makes it to 100 years old, they're the living proof. So, so what are they doing? What did they do in order to get to that point? And what we can see is that almost every part of the planet has some centurions, and there's concentrations of it a lot more. And I know there's the blue zones, which did a little bit of a disservice to really highlight sort of they took some big ideas, but they really dropped the ball when it came to talking about what it means to live to a centurion. So we have Afghanistan, Hunza Valley. We got Northern Europe is very successful. We have any mountainous area tends to have a few centurions that can make it there. Heck, even
mm,
Wyoming, I met a centurion there, which I would have never thought in the middle of North America there.
mm,
We have Okinawa, Japan. We have Salt Lake. We have all these interesting spots, and so what seems to be some commonalities and sort of the big five are: one, it's something that I rope as recovery systems. You can say sleep and look at the idea of sleep, but it's pretty simple idea. Is if you damage your recovery systems, you're gonna die faster, right? I mean, you're gonna have an accelerated problem in every regard, and depending on your genetic background, who knows what it's going to be.
mhm,
And so sleep is of the utmost, right? And that's one thing like I said, for the blue zones, those people rise with the sun. They're
mhm,
not sleeping in until 10, going to bed at 3, doing, whatever market, whatever people are doing these days to shift their lifestyle around. They also live in natural environment, very, very much so. They have less chemical residues than what I would say people in the cities do. And so that's a big part, not to disrupt your recovery systems. We have hygiene products, lotions, all these things that end up actually having unbelievable infiltration into our endocrine system. And so avoiding those is now part of this game of health, where sometimes what people need to do is simply remove, call it the problem sources, and health comes back to them. So when you're living around natural materials in brick houses, and you're in a small community, you're never really tasked with that problem. So recovery systems is one. Two is a very difficult one. It's temperament.
Mm.
I can tell you to be happier or to find more joy in your life, but it seems to be the better of let's say the scale of joy and anger. But it's also the idea of purpose. I know I've seen individuals that are quite angry. They want to see, let's say, the downfall of something, end up living quite long. Usually not
Hmm.
in the best quality of life, but again, that kind of comes to idea of purpose, but temperament. And we know that temperament, mood, how to say it, it's, yeah, in a very short way, it's people who are religious without the religion, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
They aren't too caught up with any one thing, and they have a very good biofeedback. Their emotions are very much so in tune. They get angry, they get happy, but they're in tune with what's going on with them. And we see no, it's a difficult thing to study, but we see with individuals that, for example, get cancer. Usually there's like a two-hit event that occurs that really propels them to have a higher risk. And so, if someone has a traumatic event, that's not enough. If someone's isolated, that's not enough. But if they have a traumatic event and they're isolated, that seems to be like 10 times fold increased chance for them to develop some kind of condition. The third one is exposure to cold is phenomenal. So if we take a look at just other species, there's a geographic biological principle called Bergmann's rule. So the further you go towards the poles at any given genus of species, like say penguins, the biggest ones are going to be on the farthest ends. And so the further you go, the bigger the creature. And so cold is a stressor that allows your body to rise to the challenge. When it does, it allows for you to be able to grow, heal, and clean out our system. And I say that because there's something very special about the human being as in comparison to all the other animals, is that animals are restricted to where they can dissipate their heat. And so, maybe a little too technical, but when we get energy, when we think like I'm getting energy from food, um, what we do is we strip the, the atoms of food and we pack it into a reservoir. And that reservoir, if it spills over, it can be problematic and cause damage. But this is within this little cellular location of the mitochondria. So maybe too specific, but I think if
Hmm.
someone's listening to natural health podcast, it's probably not the first time they heard the mitochondria. And so as we jam up this potential, um, only the human being seems to have the ability to shuttle it not for energy but for heat in a protein called an uncoupling protein. And whereas a mouse or a dog will be restricted where that uncoupling protein is present, the human being, almost every cell has the uncoupling protein present. So when we expose ourselves to cold, we're really not meant to, be out like naked like all the other mammals of the planet. We need clothes and whatnot. But when you're doing it for a short bout, a small exposure, your body is you're not sitting there like, shivering, wishing for it to end. No, you're doing an active breathing process. You're with it, and your body's then able to. You'll be tired after if you're not familiar with it, and you only need to do about a minute. There's no need to be a hero, but this seems to have a phenomenal effect on the molecular level of what's going on in the cell. And then we can take a look from all the fancy biotech of what those changes are, how it upregulates DNA repair enzymes, how it shifts the membranes, how it makes them more resilient from an expression of both heat shock proteins and cold shock proteins, though there's just a little bit of complexity there with some jargon. So cold exposure is phenomenal. And then for nutrition, It's a little bit hard to say for nutrition, because for all the individuals that make it to 100, they're not eating your standard typical American diet. They're eating very much alive foods that still have a metabolism to them. And what the key component for nutrition part is that it covers their entire necessity of what you need for energy and what you need for composition, the actual nutrients that make up the fabric of what you are. Your brain's a bunch of fat, so you need to eat that quality fat from some form or another. So we know omega-3s, I think, are familiar in most people's conversations. And so you're not using omega-3 for energy. You're using omega-3 to build out your membranes. You're using omega-3 for controlling your immune system. It's an anti-inflammatory. So those are the type of nutrition that you need in order to be able to just even make it without disease into a life full of health. But what's very important is that there's a practice of fasting. So we can see from every animal model, worm, mouse, rabbit, dog, a primate, a human being, when you fast, you allow the cell to do the other process. You do allow it to do it to repair and recover. So it's very simple. I think there's an intuitive understanding from the nervous system if we compare it. We have the flight or fight or the rest and digest. And the flight or fight can within a millisecond inhibit the rest and digest. You're enjoying a meal, you're hanging out underneath a tree, and all of a sudden a lion comes. You can't. That's not a priority anymore. You got to shunt your blood towards your muscles, up and at them, get out of there, right? Because if the lion gets you, the food and digestion is going to be his problem. So that makes sense. I think people understand it because they can feel it very quickly. What they can't feel very quickly is that if you eat, how it's going to cause you problems if you don't stop, call it, or respectfully eating. And in the same sense, when you eat, there is a metabolic program that starts that immediately inhibits how you clean your blood. So it's very simple. Either you're cleaning your blood or you're processing nutrients and allowing them to come in. So this notion of intermittent fasting is great that it's come very, it's a big conversation in today's day. Even though all that really is to say, it's called respectful eating. It's the default way that an adult must live. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's marketing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Breakfast is breaking the fast. It's an importance in that word. It doesn't mean eat at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning. Rather, it's get back to a notion where you actually have an energy balance where your hormones are telling you when it's appropriate to eat. And so this is something that's quite difficult, I think, for the modern day individual, is to break this hormonal cycle, right? So for the hormone for hunger is ghrelin, and it is very periodic and habituated, meaning that if you eat 3 times a day at 8, 1, and 7, before it even comes to that time, your body is about to release that hormone. When the time comes, it's released the hormone. That's why we get hungry, even though we might be in excess in an energy balance. So that hormone comes in a wave. When people know that it's going to come in a wave and they find ways to pass it, it takes anywhere between 7, which is nice, just a week, or 21 days in order for that hormone no longer to pulse, so that it actually doesn't be produced by the system. And this is where a one-day fast is, I think, something very attainable for most individuals. You simply stop eating at 5 o'clock one day and you have your meal again the next day at 5 o'clock. You've succeeded in 24-hour fast. But what that does in the molecular level, I mean, we can go off the rails there, but in a very simple sense, it's allowing that rest and digest, the parasympathetic nervous system, to turn on. And it's not just rest and digest. It's rest, digest, repair, redistribute, recover. There's a whole boatload of processes that happen when we turn that on. And it's imperative that when we eat, that we're in a good mood, that we have relaxed. And so in the modern day, with all the stimuli that we have a very difficult time calming the flight or fight, the sympathetic nervous system, which ends up putting us in a lot of problems. So this idea of fasting takes over actually nutrition in terms of priority when you start doing the math and the statistics,
Mm-hmm.
even though you can get lost in statistics. So the fasting seems to be utmost in terms of a stimuli to be able to give you that protection. And so everything I've said so far is completely free, by the way. There's been
Yeah.
no
No.
this is
Yeah.
the beautiful
Well, except
this is
maybe
the beautiful
cold
Yeah,
exposure here in Arizona. We might have to buy ice. The water doesn't get
we
that
might.
cold.
Yeah, you got to travel up north a little. We got plenty of cold
Yeah.
up here.
Where are you at?
Uh, I'm in Vancouver,
Oh
BC at
yeah.
the moment.
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
just
we got
jump in a little pond and get your cold exposure. But yeah, it's a little tricky here in Arizona to get cold water,
a
especially in the
small
summer.
investment. Yeah,
Yeah.
small investment. The little tub will go quite the ways. And so we have this notion of the fasting leads into the next one, which is digestion. And so the more that you have to invest energy into digesting your food, the faster you're going through your reserves. And so it's an expensive process to produce enzymes. You don't want to just throw them away willy-nilly. And this is where, to help remember, a tiny little bit of alcohol, right? And I again, I say tiny, like a thimbleful of distilled liquor. So not beer, probably not wine, but it seems like sake, brandies. This is what almost every culture has, is in terms of something that's a distilled liquor that they have quite regularly, and it does seem to um, call it have a very specific effect on the liver when you have a small amount. The moment you exceed that small amount, it starts going into the central nervous system, because we have enzymes to break down alcohol both in the liver, it's about 80%, and about 10% in the central nervous system, and then everywhere else just a little bit. So we don't want the central nervous system digesting the alcohol. We want the liver digesting the alcohol. And when it does, it seems to be able to support digestion, and it seems to be able to support circulation. So we got let me get recovery systems, we got temperament, we got fasting, we got digestion, we got exposure to cold, and hot obviously is also a benefit. I wouldn't just recommend someone go sit in the hot sun. You have to really take your sweet time in biology. Anything in biology really likes slow progression, 2% at a time, so that the body has time to adapt, change the expression, make the proteins it needs. And so a sauna, for example, is usually what you gravitate towards when you want the heat. And
Hmm.
the sauna allows you to absorb more nutrients. So when you're in the sauna, you should have something that's loaded with vitamin C in your water supply. You can put in powders, you can put in herbs or different routes, whatever you like, but it allows your body to be able to pull in what it needs. So those are the five big ones. Notice exercise doesn't even break it, even though
Hmm.
I advocate and
Yeah.
help people set up protocols at the right time in their life. But this is what stands out as going to have the biggest impact.
Hmm.
And this is not necessarily for any one stem cell in particular. It's not like it's just for muscle. Most of this revolves around liver health, because if you
Hmm.
support your liver, it supports your blood. And if your blood's clean, all the rest of the cells are happy.
That's awesome. I think you're the first person ever that recommended alcohol.
I said that with caution, yeah. And so it's only
Yeah,
because
but
I
a
think
thimble, like what? Like not even like a half an ounce?
half an ounce might be pushing it too. So
Oh,
I think the
even
estimate
that.
that's given with the old world is that you want to take a look at the tiny little bone of your thumb,
Yeah.
and that would be the estimate that you'd want to
Dang.
consume. So that
So
would
yeah,
be
tiny.
a very
Interesting.
small amount, and you can see the little shot glasses that these cultures that make it to 100 have,
Yeah.
and they're very respectful how much they drink. And obviously in
Huh.
celebration you'll have more, but
Yeah.
they're no one's getting boozed out of their mind.
Interesting. So I help a lot of women. That's primarily my audience. So how can stem cell biology help us better understand and support women's hormones?
Yeah, that's a tough one. The women's biology is definitely a lot more complicated than the men's,
Yep, we're
and though
complicated.
in a beautiful way. So that no, that's it's genuinely very hard, because age is something that's going to be of utmost
Hmm.
importance. So you have these three periods for, I mean, four, but let's just talk about the adult. So we take some of the complexity out. Um, the premenopausal, the menopausal, and the postmenopausal. So that's something that's very specific to the woman, is that it has the endometrium, this uterine lining that has, it's a wonderful example of true regeneration. And you'd think that there would be sort of a tax to the organism, that they wouldn't live as long, but they outlive men every country. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about, in North America, it's about 3 to 4 years that women will have longer on men. But we do have it on record too that the centurions are a lot often a higher percentage women, and they also live in the centurion bracket the longest. And so, what is it that women must take care of? And so, there's this really, I would say, critical importance in understanding estrogen and how to facilitate proper um, pulses of estrogen, because hormones are notoriously difficult to study because they are pulsatile, meaning that you don't want the hormone to stick around. The point of the hormone is that it's a signal; it's carrying a message to do something else for another cell type. And so estrogen is a fat-loving hormone, meaning that it doesn't function on the outside of the cell to tell the cell what to do. It actually goes inside the cell, which has a little bit of a complication here. So now I won't get into what's the nitty gritty. Rather, I'll give you my speculation. It's sort of like the big, hey, what do I think is happening? Is that estrogen isn't being degraded. So it gets in the cell, it activates it, tells it, hey, you're supposed to do this, and then it sticks around. When it sticks around, it causes problems of saying to the cells, saying, "Hey, you gotta keep, growing here. You gotta keep doing your thing." And so it seems to need two components. It needs the estrogen, and it needs signaling from insulin. Not just insulin, but when we use insulin on a regular day basis, it has a cascade of effects on the body. These cascade of effects can get stuck in a state where the cell thinks it should be growing more so than it needs to, because insulin is a very potent growth hormone. It's pretty much saying, hey, times are great, but if we don't supply the body with the necessity for all that division, meaning you're not running marathons, you're also not giving your body all the minerals and vitamins and other factors like we said, omega 3s, to help support that division, then something really bad happens where this endometrial lining starts escaping into all the other spots. And so that's one thing specific in which, for women to really avoid the woman specific diseases, is to know those two hormones, estrogen and insulin, and then what helps turn that over. And so it's very difficult to say, hey, you need to fast, because there isn't the clear cut evidence for the individual, where
Mm-hmm.
it might work on a demographic sense, like, hey, there's benefits. But when we start taking a look at the individual, and this is what I did over the last decade, is that there is a large inter-individual variation, right? Which is to say, there's big differences between person to person. And though we might fit trends on a very similar, for insulin or for estrogen, when we take a look at an individual, they can be quite ways off of all the other proteins or metabolites we can measure in the blood. So how do we take that into account? And this is I guess, the sad state is we're still in a guess and check method.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I can bring up all this bioinformatics, I still have to do a guess at what the next steps may be for the individuals. So, what are some things that have worked that I think are at the top of the list to dwell further down and say into heavy duty sciences, where some other lab or investigator can take on, is, do foods like beets, legumes, radishes help the enzymes that are responsible for turning over estrogen function? Because it seems those foods in particular really help the recovery if someone has gone down that road. So those are small ways in which, okay, how do I incorporate this fasting protocol? Because I must stop sending insulin signals. How
Mm-hmm.
do I help the estrogen that's being produced degrade so that the next signal can come in, so my body can go through the process, go through this event, and then where am I in the stage? Am I still menstruating? Am I in the menopausal period, or my postmenopausal period? Those all add the complication of what are you supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, resistance training is going to be good for everyone, but we know for the postmenopausal women, there's quite an issue for sustaining bone mass.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I advocate: is, okay, let's get your resistance training well before you get to that state,
Yeah.
so we see a reduction, so we don't see this effect in bone loss. And so the majority of the clientele that I had from the fitness side of things was about 70% women, and they're way more likely to seek help for their health, which is excellent, because If you leave a man alone, he'll go to a corner and he'll just die slowly without ever asking for help. It's very sad. But the women are social, they're vocal, they can connect. There's no, call it, stigma. There's a very bad stigma, I think, for the males to seek help for these events. You sort of just, you don't talk about it. You go,
Mm-hmm.
and so women that start early with their resistance training with proper protocols, one, they start having a lot of fun because they like they call it the actual acts. As soon as they go over the little hump of eight's heavy, so I'm not sure, there's sort of an unbelievable mass event happening where, you know, this is too heavy for me. I'm going to get too big, shredded, and lots of muscles. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, sorry, there's some very bad news, but if that was the case, people wouldn't be in here, 3 to 4 times a week over across the 5 years in order to build out their bodies the way they have. And so as soon as they get over that little hump of, hey, it's heavy, there's usually quite the adoption of taking it on as a lifelong practice because it feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Like, if it doesn't feel good, you're not going to stick with it.
Yeah.
And so more exercise is not better, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
right? A very specific level amount of exercise is the right way to go about it. And there's some circumstances. For example, I had a CrossFit lady, and she started getting very sick when she would go to high intensity. And it was devastating for her because she's been exercising for all her life. And so she got a very deep blood panel, about 300 biomarkers, and then found her way towards me. Like, can you interpret this for me? Because all the algorithms from the blood test, they come back with no pre-diabetes, no cardiovascular disease, none of this. But it doesn't really bring out the information she was looking for. So when I get to see it, for me, I'm like, right away, it's like, oh my goodness, this is terrifying, because she only had a few markers out of range, and all of the ones that were out of range had to do with iron binding,
Hmm.
haptoglobin, hemoplexin. So her ability to bind iron was very low, and her free iron is very high. So it you know it, no, there's not going to be another her around for God knows how long that science going to get a hold of to be able to do testing and be like, oh yes, this is what's making you sick, but you don't want free iron circulating your system.
Mm-hmm.
So all we did was support the liver through different herbs,
Mm.
different approaches, different supplements. And what worked is very slow, methodical, throw the kitchen sink at it with, hey, this herb is supposed to stimulate the liver, does it for you. And I say this in its most honest and genuine sense so people can understand, is that even though we have a repository of this herb affects this organ, I've come across more instances where you have a herb that's not supposed to affect something where it's doing it.
Mm.
Golden seal or yarrow, for example. Like my grandmother had liver cirrhosis, and she would drink a tea of yarrow and feel phenomenal. But if you look up, there's no list. Liver's not on the list for yarrow. So this is where there's this game of guess and check, because the more you understand on the cellular level, and I try to stay away a little bit of it because it's like a heavy jargon in there.
Mm-hmm.
The more you understand it, the more you realize how complex and how small little enzymes can go out of range, or equilibria can go out of range. And this is why this herbal approach is often what we've done for God knows how long, millennia. It's because you get a blanket of metabolites, not just one drug, in order to help shift the metabolism back to health, right? And nothing knocking against drugs too. Our medical system, if people understand how to use it, is phenomenal, right? The fact that we know
Yeah.
very specific what drugs can target where, you can really get yourself out of bad scenarios, right? And when we mess up in life, that's where usually we run to the
Yeah.
doctor. Hey doc, please help stabilize
Hmm.
me. But once you're stabilized, you have to figure out how to live right. You have to figure out
Right.
what was the root of your problem,
Yep.
how can you stop that problem, and then now how are you going to live life so you don't keep repeating the same
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Gosh, this has been fascinating. I could probably have you talk for an hour more, but we got to wrap it up here. I'm going to finish with one question I ask all my guests. What would be your best or favorite health tip that you can share with the audience?
Health tip, I mean, there's plenty, but what I'll say is, for your coffee, have it black.
Eh?
Don't don't put cream or sugar in the coffee. Put a tiny little bit of cacao. Cacao has
Okay.
brain effects that are positive. A tiny little bit of sea salt or high quality salt, because coffee is going to deplete you for minerals. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can add in a tiny bit of cardamom to not get the jitters. So it makes it
Ah,
so that your neurons aren't as excitable, yet having all the benefits and the joy of coffee.
oh, I like that. It's a good one. I haven't heard anyone say that one yet. I don't think I've had a repeat of really any of my health tips. So thank you. Daniel, where can people find you?
My company is called Timeline Sciences. Very, very simple idea. We all live in the same timeline, one
Yeah.
timeline. And science is what we use to describe it. That's what science really is. It's a tool. So
Mm-hmm.
timelinesciences.com. If you message me, you can get to me directly. From anything we talked about to any of the programs that I offer. More than happy to make anything customized and see what's going on with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We'll have all your information linked in the show notes. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Erin. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you again next week. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below. And if you haven't done so, please be sure to give us a rating on your favorite podcast platform. Join us weekly as we inspire you to be your best version. For more, follow me on Instagram at dr.erinellis. Until next week, you got this.